In 1954, 15-year-old Nancy, her mother, brother Bob, and Bob's 16-year-old girlfriend were spending the night at a rented cottage on Moosehead Lake in northwestern Maine. Nancy awoke in the middle of the night and sensed the presence of several beings in her room that seemed to be observing her. Light coming through the window allowed her to glimpse alien figures in her room that looked short and pudgy. She attempted to say something but found that she was paralyzed and unable to move. She tried to grab the quilt in an effort to move her body off of the bed, but to no avail. She felt that her body was being manipulated where her legs twisted back and forth, but she could not feel anyone touching her. The experience felt like an eternity, but by morning she had regained control of her body but felt nauseous and just sat on the corner of her bed. She eventually made her way to the kitchen where her mother was preparing breakfast. Her brother's girlfriend, who'd been sleeping in a room on the other side of the cottage, had also had a similar experience during the night. This was Nancy's only memory of an alien presence until the two sons were born. Thomas and his younger brother Matthew spent their early childhood years on a farm in a rural area of Sheffield, situated in the southern part of the Berkshires in Massachusetts. They lived with their mother and grandmother. They had moved there in 1962, following their parents' divorce. Their mother Nancy owned and operated the Village on the Green restaurant, where she married her second husband, Howard Reed. In September 1966, Nancy's sons observed orbs in their bedroom, where one was the size of a small dinner plate. It stayed there a while before drifting towards the left wall. Thomas said that it resembled a cylindrical ring and was transparent with a thin, bright bluish outer ring. There were also other orbs that were less visible. Thomas was afraid to move and sensed that it was watching him as he was attempting to see whether it had a face or eyes. He also wondered whether he was seeing ghosts, but changed his mind a few days later when he and his brother had what could only be described as an alien intrusion. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. One day as they were standing at the top of their staircase, they saw several 5 feet tall figures. Then after a few seconds, the ground changed under their feet, and they found themselves at the top of a tree line on the edge of their property, where they were met by other beings. They were taken into a dull-looking craft that from the outside looked like a giant turtle shell resting on the ground. The beings were small and thin, like the classic grey alien, but different. Their physical appearance looked half human, half grey. They had large eyes that may have been covered by a lens, but not as large as a stereotypical grey. On a large screen on the wall, Thomas observed an image of what looked to be 8 or 10 groups of galaxy clusters in the shape of a boot. There were also a willow tree image that seemed symbolic to him that he later drew. The beings communicated to Thomas that he was serving an important purpose for them as a participant in a biological study. In hindsight, he believed that it pertained to gene splicing for their own benefit that focused on the human immune system and genetics. When the boys were eventually released, they awoke to find themselves in their bedroom. Now curious, the boys wanted to find the location where they'd been taken, so Thomas rode his horse to the site. He found the location at the top right-hand corner of a particular field past a huge boulder and came across the wishbone tree, and beneath the branches he found the spot. Although he had never willingly been there before, he knew the path. In another abduction in 1967, they told their mother that they remembered watching darkness fall in their bedroom as flashes of light flickered on their bedroom window. At first they thought it was lightning and waited for the sound of thunder, but it never came. As Thomas was telling his brother to look at a ball of light about 20 feet outside their second-story bedroom window, suddenly a white light exploded and engulfed the room. Then the attic hatch began to rattle and the boys became frightened. Matthew wanted Thomas to open the heavy bedroom door so that they could escape down the hall to the safety of their mother's bedroom. Thomas suddenly found himself falling onto the ground and rolling as if there was no gravity, and he felt the momentary sensation of weightlessness. When Thomas hadn't opened the door as Matthew had asked, he looked down and found that his brother was no longer on the lower bunk, and in a state of panic struggled to open the door to the hallway to his mother's bedroom. After opening the door, he ran to his sleeping mother. Meanwhile, his grandmother was asleep in another bed in the room. Then 4 beings entered the bedroom and glided towards the bed, followed by a small figure that was walking. For some reason, Matthew was unable to wake his mother, who appeared to be in a very deep sleep. 2 figures floated up to his mother's side of the bed, while 2 remained by the doorway, while the 5th figure appeared to raise its long insect-like legs and jumped onto his grandmother's bed. She did not stir. Their mother did not wake until they'd left the room. The 5th figure then backed out of the room, all the while staring at Matthew. When Nancy finally awoke, Matthew told her that Thomas was missing. After searching for Thomas, she heard a loud bang, whereupon everything went blank. Meanwhile, Thomas was in a craft similar to the one he had been in the previous year, and extremely nervous. The next thing he remembered was finding himself on a hill off the driveway, looking confused and disoriented, with almost no memory of where he'd been or how he'd arrived at this location, but did remember something of what had happened. When Nancy returned after searching for him, she found him just staring and looking frightened. After giving him a drink and an aspirin, he went to the living room sofa as the mother watched over him. Later, Thomas went looking for where the craft had landed and found evidence that it was close to the 1966 landing area. The last of the family's alien encounters occurred in October 1969 after visiting a nearby resort town. As the family was heading home at dusk in their station wagon that the mother was driving, Thomas remembers his grandmother becoming fixated on lights out of the left rear side of their vehicle, and then he and his brother saw what looked like searchlights. Realizing what was about to happen and their memories of previous events, Nancy became frightened and decided to speed up, but moments later the engine died. They heard what sounded like stones hitting the underside of the station wagon, then silence, followed by the sound of crickets chirping. Suddenly they found themselves in a hot, humid alien environment. A figure grabbed Thomas's arm and took him down a hallway and into an examination room. Thomas saw 2 horrific figures with 2 more at the foot of a table and one behind him in the corner. He was forced to lie on a silver-white table, but in a state of panic jumped from the table and ran out of the room, but then found himself in an area the size of a basketball court, with a hall to the left and multiple halls to the right. Then he heard voices. Moments later, he was captured and found himself back on the table in the examination room. His movement was restricted by an oval-shaped apparatus, similar to a tanning bed that came down from the ceiling and clamped over his torso. He felt tapping on the back of his head, and stones that resembled raisins were placed on his face, chest, and leg. After examination, he was returned to the holding area, but could not see his family. They'd been returned to the car, which was now facing in the opposite direction. Thomas was now sitting in the driver's seat, his mother in the passenger seat, and his brother was curled up on the back seat in a fetal position. Meanwhile, his grandmother was walking aimlessly in the middle of the road. Thomas grabbed his grandmother, who was in a state of shock, and led her back to the car. She then stopped walking, and her body began to shake. She then broke down sobbing and repeating, "Oh my God," over and over again, as Thomas guided her into the car. His mother was now awake and drove home without saying a word. This encounter was the last straw for Nancy, where she sold their Massachusetts property and moved her sons to West Haven, Connecticut. Many years later, physical evidence would prove scientifically that the Reed family had experienced alien abductions. In 2009, Matthew had a strange experience whilst driving. After dropping off his friend at about 10:15 p.m, he decided to take the long route home. He remembered stopping at a traffic light and turned to wave goodbye to his friend. In the blink of an eye, and without any explanation, he suddenly found himself near a cornfield. His shoes were caked in mud, but he had no memory of walking in mud. His clock showed that he had lost an hour. He later made a formal report to the Mutual UFO Network, who immediately sent a response team who found physical evidence on the car, including extreme radiation readings and magnetic effects. Using a compass, the MUFON field investigator walked slowly from the hood towards the trunk. He held the compass a few inches from the metallic surface. As he approached the rear of the vehicle, the compass needle began to rotate in a counterclockwise direction. He then turned and walked in the opposite direction, and the needle stopped, then swept in a clockwise direction. He then used the compass on his own vehicle, but without any effects. It is interesting to note that a compass needle also spun when it was placed over the vehicle of Betty and Barney Hill's car in 1961. Thomas believes that his abduction continued into his adult life and his own children. One night, he woke to find his shoulders and head on his pillow, and his lower body and legs were up near the ceiling fan. He couldn't breathe or swallow, and his throat felt clogged. He was now part way over an examination table. His body was elevated diagonally between his bed and the table. His feet were over the table, and it was moving towards the second-story window. There was no gravity, and he was in the air. It was 2:33 a.m., and he found himself back in his bed breathing normally. He jumped out of bed and ran into the bathroom and splashed water on his face and head. He then heard a scream from his son's bedroom. His son also had memories of a light in the bedroom and what looked like a silver silk pillowcase over his bed. Both believed they'd been taken. Thomas was later subjected to a polygraph exam operated by a retired police officer in Knoxville, Tennessee, where they discussed the events and history in detail for over 3 hours. Thomas was asked if he'd lied about his 1966 experiences concerning the craft, and if he had intentionally lied about his experience on the craft, and passed the exam with no evidence of deception. The Howard and Nancy Reed family's multi-generational abduction case is significant in the annals of UFO abduction history.